Welcome to this Baptist News Global webinar. Here's your host, Mark Wingfield.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Mark Wingfield, Executive Director and Publisher of Baptist News Global. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today on Baptists and the Equality Act. We have an outstanding group of panelists today. This event is being live streamed on Facebook as well as occurring here on the Zoom webinar. It will be saved and posted on video on B&G's YouTube channel and on our website at baptistnews.com later today. And then you can read about it in our content tomorrow as well. We're so glad that you're joining us for this. It's an important conversation. Our tagline is conversations that matter, and this is absolutely a conversation that matters, and we're going to explain why, hopefully over the course of the next hour. For those of you who are joining us, and I'll say this again along the way, if you have questions to ask of any of our panelists or of the group just in general, use the Q&A function that you'll see down at the bottom of Zoom. If you're on Facebook Live, I'll try to pop over there occasionally and check those as well. To get started, I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves briefly. And I'm going to start, I'm just going to sort of go in the order that I see people in my Brady Bunch squares here. And that would be Guthrie first.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Baptist News Global, for hosting this conversation. My name's Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm coming to you from Louisville, Kentucky. My day job is at the Center for American Progress, where I'm a non-resident fellow with the Faith and Progressive Policy Initiative, where we work on a range of different issues, bringing religious Americans' voices to the U.S. Capitol and to impact policy making and advancing a progressive vision of religious liberty. I'm also pleased to join this panel as a Baptist, as a member of Highland Baptist Church here in Louisville. I'm new to Baptist life, been a Baptist for about 5 years, grew up in the Methodist Church and was, we can talk more about this, but was tired of fighting over my dignity as a gay man. I wanted, when I left seminary in New York City and was looking for, and my now husband and I moved to Louisville, joined a Baptist church because, we were free to be able to get married, and I've just loved it ever since I made that decision. I've loved being a part of Baptist life, and really, glad to be on this panel.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And just a little historical connection here. Guthrie is a member of a church that my family and I were members of 25 years ago in Louisville, and we share a connection with a Highland Baptist Church there and the lovely people who are there. Nancy, let's go to you next.
Good evening, I'm Nancy Petty, and I am honored to be on this panel with these esteemed colleagues of mine. I'm coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina, from Pullen Memorial Baptist Church, where I have served as pastor for the last 29 years. I will celebrate my 30th year in June of next year. So I have been a lifelong Baptist. I grew up in the western part of North Carolina in a Southern Baptist congregation, a small Southern Baptist congregation, and was lucky to grow up in churches in Baptist life that I would say was conservative, but not fundamentalist. But as time passed and things developed, the Baptist world began to narrow its vision of who's at the table. And when I was in seminary at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in the late 80s, that's when the takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention happened. And at that point, I came to Pullen not long after that. And Pullen was duly aligned with American Baptist and Southern Baptist. And in 1992, Pullen was disfellowshipped from Southern Baptist life because of our welcoming and affirming stance and our decision to bless same gender covenants at that time in 1992. We have since left also the American Baptist Churches USA for the same reasons. Their lack of inclusion for the LGBT community. And so we are an Alliance of Baptist congregation now. That is our main denominational Baptist home. I'm married to Carla Oakley. I have 2 adult children and one King Charles Cavalier Spaniel who rules the house. But I'm grateful to be in this conversation this evening and to speak about this issue that is so important to me.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And Nancy's already won the award for Best Background for Zoom today. All the rest of us are, yeah, I don't know, but Michael Ray is going to be a close second because of the soft focus going on. It's really stylish, and I feel quite underdone by all of this.
I'm actually sitting in Pullen Sanctuary.
Yeah, it's not just an image, it's the real deal, right? Thank you. Okay, T, let's move on to you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and I am honored as well to be among these colleagues today, and some of whom I have met and some of whom I'm looking forward to hearing from as well. I'm grateful to Guthrie for the invitation to join with us through Maggie Siddiqui at the Center for American Progress. I'm coming to you today from the Washington, D.C. area. We call it the DMV for D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. I'm on the Virginia side and a proud and happy member of the Alfred Street Baptist Church, though I'm not representing Alfred Street today. Pastors the Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley. I am currently a senior consultant for church engagement and social justice with Sojourners, working with the Reverend Adam Taylor and founder Jim Wallace, who is now rotating out to become an endowed chair over at Georgetown in the Center for Faith and Justice. I'm the immediate past president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention here in Washington, D.C., and am delighted to be among friends today. And I certainly do claim you all as friends. I look forward to our conversation.
Oh, thanks so much, T. Okay, Amanda, you're the person I see next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Hambrick Ashcraft, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I am Zooming in with you all today from the East Village in New York City, where it's very, very hot. I don't know how it is in DC and the rest of the world today, but it's very hot up here today. So I hope you all are cool wherever you are. I'm the Executive Minister for Justice and Community Development at Middle Collegiate Church, also in the East Village, not far from where I am. And I'm also the founder of an online movement platform called Raising Imagination. I'm married to my husband, Graham, and I have 3 children who you will probably hear if we really do go an hour. And I'm also really honored to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Great. Okay, Michael Ray, please welcome.
Greetings. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Baptist News Global, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of this conversation today. I'm Michael Ray Matthews, he, him pronouns. I live in San Jose, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am the proud president of the board of directors for the Alliance of Baptists, Nancy Petty's denominational home, a beautiful community of progressive Baptists who are committed to justice and healing. In my day job, I am the deputy director and chief faith officer for Faith in Action, a national and international network of faith-based community organizing groups. And I'm also the proud host of a podcast where we get to have powerful conversations about the intersection of faith and justice called the Prophetic Resistance Podcast. I too am a lifelong Baptist. I grew up in Los Angeles, growing up in churches that were affiliated with the American Baptist denomination as well as the National Baptist Convention. I've served 4 congregations, either in either denomination or both, sometimes dually aligned. I spend most of my time in Alliance of Baptist Spaces these days, especially in my role as president, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this conversation we're having today.
Wonderful. Thanks to each of you. And for those who've joined us in the meantime, just a reminder that if you have a question along the way you'd like to pose to our panelists, use the Q&A function, and I'll be moderating those as we go. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can also type in a question there, and that will get relayed to us through the folks who are monitoring that. If you're watching this after the fact, sorry, you had your moment, but hopefully we'll get to your question anyway. Okay, I want us to just dive right into the big issue here. And we're talking today about the Equality Act in Congress. And I think the place to start with that is to ask some of you, each of you or some of you, to say, why is this such a big deal? And why is there so much attention being paid to this particular piece of legislation? And just whoever wants to go first, have at it. Please.
I'm happy to dive in first.
Okay.
Other people can follow. I think a lot of people are unfamiliar who maybe don't closely follow federal legislation that we don't have federal non-discrimination protections for the LGBTQ community. That in 29 states, including here in Kentucky, there are not laws that explicitly protect the LGBTQ community from discrimination, which is why the U.S. House of Representatives has passed the Equality Act, which would amend our nation's civil rights laws, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, to explicitly prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity in employment, housing, public accommodations, education, federally funded programs, credit, and jury service. So that is the why we're here, why we need this patchwork of laws that we have at the state and local level creates a lack of clear and consistent protections that apply across the board. And I think people are surprised, like I said, to learn that these don't exist. And they're very, very popular protections. When you poll these ideas, it's just Congress needs to get the job done.
Excellent.
I think that's what I would add. We're in a moment in time historically where I think that if you poll Americans, which polls have been done, there is great support for these kinds of protections to be legislated and put into our laws. And why do these things not happen before this? Why in this moment does it seem to be the moment? I think it's because of brave people in the LGBT community who are standing up for their rights and advocating for themselves, and faith groups and other groups who are brave enough to risk speaking out for morally and religiously, this is the right thing to do. So I think we're in one of those moments historically when the spirit is moving and speaking, and people understand more than maybe ever before that this is the morally, spiritually right thing to do in this country.
Excellent. Someone else? Well, if you don't want to answer that question, let's move on to this. So as you've heard, the Equality Act at its core is seeking to level the playing field in non-discrimination in a wide range of services. And most people assume that this already exists, but as Guthrie explained, it doesn't. It varies state by state. And this is not the only issue like that with the patchwork, but it's a very prominent one, right? So one of the chief criticisms that those particularly among the Christian right and the evangelical community have lobbed against the Equality Act with great fervor is that it's not going to level the playing field for them. It's going to take them backward in their ability to have their deeply held religious beliefs allow them to discriminate in certain ways. And I'm oversimplifying this, right? But I'm hoping some of y'all would explain, is that a real fear? Whether it's real or not, how should we understand and respond to this, which I think is one of the chief criticisms that we hear out of this. How do you respond to that?
You may have seen me laughing a little bit because it is just hard to even hear that, but I recognize that I come from a part of the country, and specifically a church that is very, very progressive, but it's a real fear, right? If it's a narrative that's in the world, then of course it's a story that is out there, and it's a story that has some weight behind it. I think we need to be, especially as faith leaders, very loud and clear and explicit in the fact that passing the Equality Act is not asking anyone to change their beliefs, period. It's just simply saying that we believe that it is a fundamental human right. And as people of faith, we believe that it is a moral right that all people are protected under the law against discrimination. And so if that is the message that we can carry forth, then we can dispel the fear that we are taking anyone away from what they might think to be a Christian or religious belief, which of course I don't hold that same belief, but that is not even what is at play here with the Equality Act.
Someone else want to add to that, please?
Sure, I'd like to jump in, if I might. This whole idea that that all people are to be treated equally under the law is at the core of my fight for racial justice. So it is also at the core for my fight for everyone. And I come at this, as most of us in this room come at it, from a faith perspective. It is a theological, it is a moral imperative that we surround each other and that we lift each other in an equal way under the law, and not get into all of the differences that we might have over what we believe. Faith freedom is critical. And I've done some work with the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, and they are also on board with this kind of idea that faith freedom is that a threat to anyone's freedom, religious freedom, is a threat to everyone's religious freedom, and that we must be on the side of right when it comes to leveling the playing field, as it were, to your question, Mark, leveling the playing field. We are not asking, as Amanda has said so rightly, that anyone change their beliefs, but that you're treated equally, that everyone be treated equally. This same argument was being used, by the way, of course, during the Civil Rights Movement, and when we were trying to overturn segregation, that segregation, we want the right to discriminate against our Black brothers and sisters in restaurants and in interstate travel and all of that. You can feel that way, but you don't have the right to do that with people who are in fact born in the image of God, born and created in the image of God, just as everyone else.
Thank you.
I just want to, if I may, I might like just to underscore everything that's already been said, particularly as it relates to the ways in which our freedoms and our sense of liberation are tied together. I didn't answer the first question largely because this particular conversation didn't really come into view until I received the invitation. I started asking myself, now why is it that I'm having to do all this research and ask all these folks to help me understand exactly what this frame is? Why am I not a part of the active conversation in this moment? And I think in part it's connected to the ways in which I've been a part of those kinds of conversations in sort of ecclesial context over many, many years. And I'm now in spaces where that is not the number one conversation that we're having anymore. We are now actually free in many ways to explore more about what it means to be who we are, to understand our relationship with God, through the lens of our queer kindred. And so there's a way in which I'm being freed and liberated through the capacity to be in relationship with my queer kindred. And so it's important that people like me and others are aware of this conversation, because some of us may feel that in our own spaces we've set the table, and that we're not having that conversation anymore. But clearly, this Equality Act is on the table, and we're having this conversation because there are so many of our kindred who are in many ways experiencing oppression, experiencing ways in which they are not having access to the kind of freedom that we believe all people should have. So once again, my freedom is tied up with the freedom of my kindred, and so we must have this conversation if we really want to ultimately experience that liberation together.
Well, thank you both for those last two answers that sort of connect some dots here. For those who maybe are not following religious liberty cases that much, just a quick primer here to say that one of the fundamental challenges happening in the religious liberty space, and our friends at BJC are on the forefront of this, is that there are two visions of what religious liberty means in America today. And there is a side that opposes things like the Equality Act that focuses almost solely on the free exercise of religion, namely their religion. And everything is about their ability to practice their religion the way they want to, even if it is a hateful religion. I'll channel Wendell Griffin here for just a moment from a previous webinar of ours. And this is what we see happening, like with the Masterpiece Cake Shop case about, whether you have to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding if you're open to all other people, right? This is the root of that. On the other hand, there's a traditional view of religious liberty that most of us hold that says that we balance no establishment of religion along with the free exercise of religion, so that everybody gets the free exercise of religion, and the government's not going to favor one over the other out of this. And this really, I think, is at the root too of the criticism of the Equality Act. All of the arguments against it are based in, that I hear from religious people, are based in free exercise claims. That this is going to prevent them from living out their religion the way they want to. And y'all have sort of touched on that, but I'm wondering if anyone would like to dig a little deeper on that and maybe talk more about the precedent and the big trend that this connects to.
I just want to jump in here with what's so sad about this conversation about people who portray religious freedom as a license to discriminate against LGBTQ people. What's sad is what's lost is that the Equality Act is a monumental achievement for religious freedom, in that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 already prohibits discrimination on the basis of religion, but the Equality Act updates and expands the number of public places where our nation's federal civil rights laws apply, to include places like retail shops, ride shares, your Ubers and your Lyfts, shopping malls. There's a whole range of places that we modernize and update our laws so they really impact people where they're discriminated against. And so the Equality Act, in addition to expanding protections for the LGBTQ community, really is a victory for expanding protections for people who are actually discriminated against because of their religion. And so that's where we should be discussing, not this right. Kind of distortion of religious liberty, which says, I have a right to discriminate, as Dr. Body was saying, has been said before, and we don't want to go down that path again. But we just need to underscore that the Equality Act is a win, is a victory, is welcomed by religious minorities who face discrimination in this country based on their religion.
Well said.
I think we have to acknowledge, Guthrie, that the white Christian church, as Michael Ray was in a conversation for the Alliance with the man whose name I can't think of right
Robbie
now.
Jones.
Robbie
Jones.
Jones. Robbie
Mhm.
Jones, who says it is the white Christian church that has held up the center pole of the tent for racial injustice. And I think it is also the white Christian church that holds up the center pole of the tent to discriminate against the LGBTQ community. And so I think there is an angle in this conversation where we have to address how Christianity, white Christianity, is writing this narrative in a way that discriminates, and we have to say, but that's not the narrative, that there's another narrative to write here, and it is one of religious liberty for all. But they don't, you know, as long as the white Christian church continues to see this nation as a Christian nation and define it that way, we're going to have to talk about that. I think that has to enter the conversation, and we have to be honest about the role being played here to say, but that's not right. That is not morally, spiritually, that narrative is wrong. And I think we have to be bold enough to say that. And sometimes I think as liberals, we've just keep letting the other side write the narrative and tell the story in a way that just keeps perpetuating these lies, whether it's protections for LGBTQ or discrimination against our Black and brown and indigenous brothers and sisters. I mean, it's just like at some point you've got to address it and say, no, your narrative is wrong. And here is another narrative that includes all of us and that can protect everyone in this.
So I just want to tie this to, let's get some other responses. I don't want to cut anyone off. There's an excellent opinion column in the New York Times today by Paul Krugman that is, I think it's today, I read it today at least, that goes to this very point that talks about when you tell a lie about this and you tell a lie about that for your political gains, there's a spillover effect that you got to keep telling lies about other things as well to keep the narrative that you just talked about going. And there is a connection to this, which is why, you know, before we started this afternoon, T, you were talking about the connection between the Equality Act and the George Floyd Act. And this is not the only thing that's sort of been stalled along the way. There are some common themes to this, right? And maybe you'd talk about that again too.
Well, I would, you know, really want to say, you know, so much has been said, and my mind is going faster than I could speak. But the truth of the matter is, for me, I did some work. I did an article some just last month for the Alliance of Baptists that Michael Ray is president of, and it is a brief article in which I look at the wonderful documentary that was done during Black History Month. I don't know if you all saw that on the Black Church. It was a wonderful documentary, 400 years of racial, of the Black Church within 4 hours of television. And that has its own problems trying to get there. And one of the problems was that they reduced the problem with homophobia in the Black church to maybe 3 minutes of conversation. And, you know, as a Black Baptist, I have to be honest, and we have to be as forthright about that as we are about everything else when it comes to deconstructing the conservative white evangelical theology that has actually crept into the Black church. And that it continues to foster this idea that the Black church, of all churches, can discriminate against anybody for any reason. And so there's this difference that between the personal piety on the one hand of the white theology that we've all, certainly had some encounters with over the golden rule, over the Jesus message, over the do unto others as we would have them do unto you. And so that documentary, as wonderful as it was, missed an opportunity to critique the Black church in that regard. They instead just decided that it was, not a lot there to talk about, since our LGBTQ kindred have sort of been able to be in a space where there's this don't ask, don't tell policy in the Black church, and that cannot be uplifting for any community. The only saving grace about that, and I'll say this, and I'll stop, but it was at the end when Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, who the author of that groundbreaking book that many of you have read, Sexuality in the Black Church, a Womanist Perspective. She's an Episcopalian womanist theologian. And she raised the thought-provoking question that is the question, I think, for this moment as it relates to the Black Baptist Church. And that is, how is it that a church that emerged out of the struggle for freedom would then indeed oppress its own members? And so, as a straight man, I have actually come out of the closet, as it were, as an ally with the LGBTQ community. And for so many years, I have been, I'm 62 years old now, and it was not fashionable. I love what Nancy's talking about. The moment that we're in now, I'm old enough now to not care what people think but about the right of theology, the rightness of my theology. And to really, what I really want them to do is to begin to free themselves, because when we oppress others, certainly you oppress yourself. And I'll just get off my soapbox.
Yeah, great. Anyone else want to hop on that?
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, indeed. There's a quote. There's a principle that I teach that gets quoted all the time now, that if we're not cultivating a moral imagination together, we're probably living inside someone else's. And as I sit in this conversation, I'm realizing the ways in which we are still living inside a very small imagination, one that insists that this is a Christian nation, which is already kind of de facto, at least in your mind, an establishment of religion. And it's like everything flows from that. And if we are not actively cultivating an ongoing way, cultivating a conversation that expands the moral imagination of who we are as a people, we'll find ourselves facing these moments where our kindred are being oppressed, are being hurt, are being wounded, are being killed, and that we are being diminished and losing our humanity and losing our own liberation. And so I appreciate so much the ways in which this conversation is illuminating the imaginal work that we need to do consistently if we're going to create the kind of culture, community, and society that's rooted in equality and love.
Wow, well said. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Amanda.
Yeah, I'm also loving this conversation. And just going back to the lies piece again, like the lies that culture tells us, the lies that we tell ourselves, whiteness tells a lot of lies. And, one of those, obviously, here relevant to this conversation is that, heterosexuality is the way that, we have to be. Obviously, the intersectional piece here is that also white supremacy, flourishes out of the violence of whiteness. And, until we can, with our moral imaginations, dispel all of those myths, all of the lies that whiteness tells, we will not be able to help our congregations, to help other people of ethical and moral faith understand that this is something that is hurting all of us, no matter who we are, and especially white people, white straight people, that if we can't understand that this is something that is keeping even myself as a white straight person from being fully who I am called to be. I am not fully living into who I can be if I continue to perpetuate the lies that heteronormativity and whiteness are the way, the truth, and the life. And I said that on purpose.
Right, right. Oh, beautiful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
There, Mark. I just love this idea of imagining a better future. I'm thinking about John's gospel and Jesus saying, I came to bring you abundant life, and thinking about how the Equality Act will enable people to more fully live lives of abundance that we're all called to live, and that we're called to build together a society of abundant living. And that when we have discrimination and across all different forms of discrimination, it really limits people's ability to live the lives we're called to live. And so I love the beautiful, positive, future-looking kind of moral imagination that we are all called to do our part.
Beautiful, thank you. I'm reminded of a column that one of our columnists, Russ Dean, wrote a few weeks ago, where he was talking about issues like this in theology. And he said the problem is that our God is not big enough. Our vision of God is not big enough. We're so limited in what we think God is capable of doing or being that we get trapped in this. So lest we only pick at the Black church on this from earlier, the largest, I can't use the word Protestant because technically Baptists are not Protestant, the largest non-Catholic religious body in America, of course, is the Southern Baptist Convention. And even though they are dwindling in numbers, they're still double the size of the next largest Christian group in America. So people pay attention to what they do. And at their recent annual meeting, among dealing with race and all these other issues, sexual abuse and so many other things, and a move by the far, far right to take things over, they also passed a resolution damning the Equality Act. Among all the things that they chose to be incensed about, this was high on the list there. And I wonder, many of us have deep historical connections to the Southern Baptist Convention, as Nancy talked about earlier. I wonder, how would you respond to that resolution, and what would you say to Southern Baptists about that, and how do we counter that message?
So Southern Baptists have always had a litmus test. And so you can follow it historically as to who they deem is outside and who's on the inside. Blacks, women, divorced. I mean, you just go down it. Today, it's the LGBTQ community, it's gay people. And 10 years from now, it'll be somebody else. But it seems historically that they need someone, some group to marginalize and to deem the enemy of Christian theology, of their faith. I don't know the real roots of that, but it's there historically in their narrative. And so, in one sense, you look at it and I look at it and I say, well, this is their litmus test right now. And 10 years from now, it'll be somebody else. And this issue will, they'll be off of this issue. But at the heart of it, sometimes I feel like they use these issues to do what religion has been used to do for centuries, and that is to control people, to keep their, if you will, subjects under their control, because if the Spirit really moves and gets a hold of people and frees them and says to them, and people get that sense of we are all equal, we are all created in the image of God. If that message gets out of control, then they have no control and they lose control, and somehow that is the biggest threat to them of all. And so that's kind of the way I read that scenario, is that they constantly have to have an enemy, and they have to somehow keep their quote subjects under control. And this is the way they do that. And I don't, I don't know how many of the people sitting in the pews really own that, because they go home and they have family members who are queer kindred, and they know these real life stories, and they're living daily in these other places. But you get in these sanctuaries with these pastors preaching this stuff, and it's like, people don't rise up against it.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to note that while they are the largest and do exert, a lot of influence, we have polling from the Public Religion Research Institute that shows federal non-discrimination protections for the LGBTQ community are supported by a majority of all major faith groups, including white evangelicals. Right. So it doesn't get all the way down into denomination, but we do know across all Catholics, white evangelicals, white mainline, Black Protestants, across all the major groups that Public Religion Research Institute polls, people in the pews actually support these, non-discrimination protections for the LGBTQ community, which is not to discount or, try to say the harm is not very real that's being done by the Southern Baptist Convention, but we shouldn't equate that with what American Christians, American people of faith want to see Congress do, which is pass the Equality Act.
Beautiful.
Well, if I could just jump in, Mark, what I'm struck by is that quote by Martin Luther King Jr., one of the many, but this one for this moment seems appropriate, that, we will not, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but rather the silence of our friends. And for me, we know the Southern Baptists, we're shocked but not surprised at what they do. But it's those in the survey that you just quoted who may be for the Equality Act, but who don't say anything, but who are silent on that issue.
Yes, yes.
And who will not stand up. And when you don't stand up, you're just, in my judgment, you're just as guilty and just as complicit with the status quo until you are able to be a vocal ally in this moment.
Again, thank you. Beautifully said. But as we head to what was our last question from me, and then we'll see if we've got some questions coming in from others. I've got one that we'll get to in just a moment, and then we'll get to maybe any others if they pop up. The big question, I think, the takeaway is what now for us, right? What are things that we can do? One of the problems in American politics, and Guthrie, you've written about this and you know this more than probably any of the rest of us, is that the deck in some ways is stacked against progress because of gerrymandering as it relates to Congress in particular. And hello, I'm talking to you from Texas. So we know something about that down here. We're going to build our own border wall, by the way. So I know for a lot of folks like me who live in a place like this, I'm like, okay, contact my senators. That's not going to do any good. I mean, Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, that's not a good answer for me. What can I do? What can people in other places do to help on this issue and to make their own views be heard?
My senators are, sorry, go ahead.
No, let me just say that I was just on a call last night with with where Cheryl Eiffel made a statement, and I was struck by something that she said that speaks to what you just said. I'm in Virginia, and Virginia's gone blue. So sometimes I don't think even going to senators who are already on board with this, it will make a difference. But Cheryl Eiffel was saying that, no, it does make a difference. It makes a difference, even if no matter what side they're on, you have to tell your voice, because at the end of the day, they do represent the people of their state. And if we bombard those those senators with that kind of activity, I think it's very, very important that we do that. And that's one of the few things that we have. Now, we know we have to concede that there are some things that, some battles that we will lose going in, but that does not give us the license to be silent on those issues.
Guthrie?
I was just going to say, I empathize with being in a state with senators. My senators, Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul, are not likely to support the Equality Act, but we are people that should proclaim inclusive, moral imagination that people will be born again to see the dignity of all, that people will be convicted, that our siblings in Christ will be transformed by the Spirit to, embrace the equality of all. And in states like North Carolina, that's really important, because you have a senator who is, expressed during the first ever Senate hearing on the Equality Act, not outright opposition, but that would be Senator Tillis. Some qualified, he had some questions, so in states where you have a senator, like anyone watching from Maine, any Baptist from Maine, Susan Collins, there are senators that are more likely. And also those that have already supported the Equality Act need our thanks and praise too, because they need to hear that, their support matters. And so I think there's a role for everybody in our own social circles, in our own spheres of influence, posting about it. There's a lot going on. It's been alluded to over and over again in this call right now by Congress. And we're up against the fact that people already think these protections exist. So we have a lot of challenges, even amongst people that are supportive. So we all have something to do in posting about the Equality Act in Pride Month. Happy Pride, everybody. In Pride Month, but every month to just keep the drumbeat going. And it's going to get a vote in the Senate sometime. It's already passed the House. It's coming up for a vote in the Senate sometime in the next few months. And so anything we can do in any state, you have friends and family, I know, I do, all across the country, and we can all raise our voice, especially as Baptists, because people will be surprised. All of us, we'll all catch people's attention when we say we're Baptists for the Equality Act. And so let's use that to our advantage.
I remember what Sister Simone said to me once when she was doing the Nuns on the Bus across the country against Ryan's budget. And I had her here at Pullen, and I said, what can we do? We've got to speak out. What do we do? And she said to me, when you're standing in the grocery store line, you mention to the person standing beside of you, before you, behind you, hey, do you know about the Equality Act? Or when you're walking in the neighborhood and you run across a neighbor and you say, I'm thinking about the Equality Act. Do you know what that is? But it was such a simple answer Sister Simone gave. It's like, wherever you are and whomever you're with, that's a moment to speak about what matters to you. And I love that.
I love that. It points to the ways in which the work we have to do is multidimensional. Obviously there's a focus on the Equality Act itself and the legislation and the ways in which we will influence, those who will make decisions about what is on the table in Congress. But there is also all of this, personal work that we do in an ongoing way, intra and interpersonal work in terms of relationships, the way Nancy was talking about, folks, having conversations in real life, but also cultural work. what are the stories that are behind the pain that we are trying to alleviate in the Equality Act? How do we make sure that we're telling those stories in powerful ways so that people are aware that despite the stats out there about the support for equality, that there are so many who continue to suffer? And so how do we raise those stories up in an ongoing way, not just in this moment, but also in moments to come?
So I want to jump in here and clarify a question that was asked that we've sort of addressed, but I want to make sure we've explicitly stated it. The question is, what is the status of the act at this time, and what's the timeline on that? So the Equality Act has, as Guthrie said earlier, has passed the House for the second time. It did in the previous Congress and went nowhere beyond that. It passed during the current Congress and is now in the Senate, where it actually has had a hearing. And we believe it will be scheduled for a vote. So this is a real issue at this point, but it is very active, and you can, of course, follow our website for the updates on that and follow the news directly on that. A couple of questions I want to close with that people have asked. I'm going to combine these into one thing and let y'all respond to it. One of the comments that's in the form of a question is, we talked about the Alliance of Baptists, we talked about the Southern Baptist Convention, we talked about some of the historic Black conventions. A number of us are affiliated also with the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, which is a group that still is very divided over LGBTQ inclusion. And the comment here is that many CBF churches continue to discriminate in various ways against the LGBTQ community, maybe not as harshly as SBC churches, but nonetheless, right? And this becomes confusing, the person says, when people join these churches and think they're walking into one thing and maybe they're, not walking into that because it's not uniform. And that's part of the nature of Baptist identity, is the autonomy of the local church. And that here's where this ties into this question that someone else has asked. What is it from your own Baptist perspective that causes you to support LGBTQ equality? And I think that's a good place to maybe close this conversation is, as a Baptist, why are you doing this?
My perspective on that, if I could just answer very quickly, is that I'm both Black and Baptist, and I have to, and I don't separate those things. In my family, we say I'm Baptist born and Baptist bred. When I die, I'm going to be Baptist dead, right? But the truth of the matter is, those two things are not separated from me in a way. Raphael Warnock, in his great book, The Divided Mind of the Black Church, said the Black Church was born fighting for freedom. So to your question, Mark, it's freedom that draws me to this situation, that draws me to this conversation. The religious freedom and the freedom for people to live their own truth, and to live their own truth within their own faith. And that's what really drives my passion around this issue now.
Someone else?
I can jump in there. Freedom is absolutely a tenet that speaks to my Baptist roots, that draws me to this work, and also, Dr. Cohn's work and his talk about God of the oppressed. And right now, in this country, what whiteness and white supremacy does is systemically and individually oppress non-white, non-straight, not male people. And so if I am attempting to align myself with God and who I would imagine God being, who I know God to be in the world today, and the work that God would be doing, it would be to be advocating for alongside anyone who is oppressed and anything that is in opposition to justice and love. That would be where I would find myself in my Baptist roots, are what inspire me to do that. And I wanted to say one other just word too on one of the questions. I think that was essentially like, what can we be doing, right now with this work? And, community organizing 101 teaches us that you do start with the people who are ready. And so whereas absolutely we have to continually, not be in bubbles and not be in just only progressive spaces where we forget, what Fox News is saying, we also have to do what we're doing right now and have conversations like this and do what Guthrie is like the absolute best at, which is saying, but the progressive Christian and faith left is here. We're here and we're loud. And why aren't we saying this more? And so if we can tell those stories more and more, that is helpful. And I can't remember if it was Nancy or Michael who said something before about, in progressive spaces, we've also set a table. And in some ways we forget to even then do the advocacy work, and middle absolutely has growing edges there. And, I think too, we talk a lot about local organizing and local politics. And of course that's true. But what has this last year taught us? I'm on staff at Middle Church and we have members literally all over the globe. So if I'm doing an event at Middle, I'm actually doing local politics all over the country. And I don't think that we can forget that right now in our spaces either.
I've always hated the Baptist question. So I'm always trying to figure out my identity as a Baptist. It's like a lifelong struggle. And for so many years, especially when I was in seminary, my identity as a Baptist was really defined by those 4 fragile freedoms of soul, Bible, church, and religious freedom. And that still didn't work for me because they were frames that seemed disembodied and quite abstract. Like, how do they actually live in the real world? And so I have to say, for me as a Baptist who was like immersed in water, like, what does it mean for me to be immersed in these questions and in these discussions? Because I'm really interested in what does it mean for my imagination around this, my understanding of this, my living of this to be radical and enfleshed and transformative, so that I'm not only asking how are my kindred being freed, but I'm trying to understand the soul damaging power of homophobia and transphobia, not on its obvious targets, but on everybody who's connected to our kindred. And so as a Baptist, I really want to practice the freedom to go deep. And in the words of Reverend Angel Kilda Williams, to queer it up, to queer up our religion, to queer up our theology. That's for all of us.
Good. Anyone else?
I think for me, it is the freedom thing, and those 4 fragile freedoms of Walter Sheridan that Michael Ray just mentioned. Soul freedom is so significant in my own personal journey, because at some point, as one who was raised Baptist, and even though not in fundamentalist churches and conservative churches who heard that homosexuality was a sin, I had to reconcile who I knew I was and how God created me as a same gender loving person. I had to reconcile that with my faith. And soul freedom gave me the place and the space to do that, to decide. My Baptist identity taught me it was up to me to do that work, to work out my salvation with fear and trembling before God, by myself, in community with support if I could find it. But it was up to me to do that work and have that freedom to do that work. And, it was that point in which I came in that moment, and it was a moment for me. It happened on a journey, but there came a moment when I had to say, the biggest sin I could commit in my life is to not live who God created me to be. And God created me to be who I am as a same gender loving person, as a lesbian, and I have to embrace that. And I don't only embrace it, I have to celebrate it and live into it to its fullest, as Guthrie said in the beginning, as abundantly as I could. And that's what this Equality Act is about for me, because week after week, I sit in my church and people come to me with their stories about how they're discriminated against, how their families have disowned them, and religion is at the core of that. And it is my calling, and it is part of my responsibility and honor as a person of faith to journey with those people and to be with them and be their witnesses as they move into that space to say, God celebrates who they are.
Amen to everything everyone said. And I'll just add really quickly at the end here, as the newest Baptist of the group, only about 5 years, I'll just add that, coming from the Methodist Church, where I went actually to this global gathering of Methodists where they were going to vote on my dignity, and it was really traumatic to people that didn't even know each other, from all over the world voting on whether or not I could be ordained or get married in the church. And so I've come to love the autonomy of the local church, and that the decision at my church to do same-sex marriages and affirm LGBTQ people was the churches, people that knew each other. Because these conversations are difficult. We all know this, these conversations, every church in America is having this conversation, or has had it at one point. And I get it. These conversations are difficult. I love in Baptist life, it happens amongst people that actually know each other. But here's what's not difficult. In public spaces, in federally funded programs, in the public square, that we cannot all agree that discrimination has no place in our country, which is why we need to pass the Equality Act and why majorities of all religious groups support the Equality Act.
Okay, that's a pretty good summary for the end, I think here. I want to say a special word of thanks again to all of our panelists. What an outstanding conversation. And this is just great to be around the virtual table here for this. I'm so grateful for each of you. And for those who've been watching and those who are watching later, this video will be posted on our B&G website at baptistnews.com and on our YouTube channel for Baptist News Global as well. You can watch it, you can share it with others as well. We hope that you'll keep the word going on this. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say, please check back our website regularly, subscribe to our daily emails to see the updates on this and many other things as we continue to cover this issue and other matters of faith and culture that you'll be interested in. Thanks again to everyone, and good evening.
Support independent faith-based journalism. Baptist News Global.